My name is Carrie Staten. I'm the director of the Brownfields Assistance Center at West Virginia University, and we are the lead for Mid-Atlantic TAB. And that is the program under which we're doing this webinar this morning. We're excited to partner with our friends at the Center for Creative Land Recycling and Atlas Community Studios and our pal Charles from Hopewell, Virginia. Today we're going to be talking about how small towns can lead the change in local development. But before I hand it over to our speakers, I want to tell you some housekeeping. We are recording the webinar now, and we'll be providing that recording as well as the slides via email to everyone who registered, and it will be on our website. You'll probably get that either from our tab email or from Haley Paul. You can also email Haley or call our office line, and we'll drop that information in the chat if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, and we can try to help sort that out for you. TAB stands for Technical Assistance to Brownfields. We are the Region 3 Technical Assistance to Brownfield provider. All of our work is funded by EPA and is completely free to anyone in the region who's looking for brownfield support. So if you have a question about a brownfield in your community or want to know more about that, you can reach out to us directly. And I'll put our website and email address in the chat as well. Let's get started. Kate, next slide. So we have three great speakers today. First up in our Master of Ceremonies is Kate Green with Atlas Community Studios. She's been working in community development for more than 20 years. I've known her for at least half of that. And she's worked in brownfield redevelopment specifically, as well as a lot of things related to downtown revitalization, historic preservation, financing, working with developers. And we live in the same local community, so I can confirm that she's very passionate about local communities. And we're going to have a great time today. So she'll kick us off, and we also are joined, as I said, by Charles Bennett from Hopewell, Virginia. We recently hosted a conference in Hopewell, and there's a lot of really great things going on there, and we're happy to highlight what Charles and his crew are doing there. He leads economic development and redevelopment for the city of Hopewell. He's been working for more than 20 years, managing projects in that area, and brings that public sector experience as well as some private sector experience. And then we are also joined by Alex Holland, also from Atlas Community Studios, who is a lobbyist and knows everything that's going on. She told me before this, she knows everything that's going on in Washington, D.C., and you should ask her every single question. Just kidding. But she does know the most of our crew here today. Her specialties are economic development, grant strategy, and strategic planning. And she's here to share information on that in the context of your development project. So with that, I will toss it to Kate and say that we do have great presentations. If you have questions at any time, you can drop them in the chat. We may answer some of them as we go. We may save some of them for the end, but we'll also have time at the end for you to just unmute and ask your questions as well. So Kate, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. Hey, everybody. I thought I would actually start today with a story. Once upon a time, I was the director of a Main Street program in a small West Virginia town, the same town that Carrie lives in. And my job was to help revitalize downtown. And for the longest time, we felt that meant focusing our energy on trying to recruit developers and investors from outside of our town and convince them to believe in our vision and spend their money fixing our buildings, which is a very tough sell in a soft market, especially in these communities that have suffered decades of disinvestment with no recent or kind of notable improvements to make our case. And so we decided to take a different approach. And we bought the worst building on the block. And this is a picture of that building. And trust me, the inside of this building was way, way worse than the outside. But we didn't do it because we wanted to be developers. We wanted to prove to people what was possible. And the goal of what we were doing was to kind of create enough momentum that other people would follow us. And they did, right? They saw that we could do it, and we didn't know what we were doing, but we did it. And it inspired others to do the same. And over the next couple of years, at least 9 other local folks purchased and redeveloped downtown buildings. And only one of those 9 were actually developers, right? These were just local folks with big ideas and a commitment. And so when I think about that now, the building wasn't actually the biggest success of that work. It was that movement that we created. It was this big shift from kind of this reliance on outside investment into laying a foundation for local ownership. And that is really what this conversation in today's webinar is about. Ooh, sorry. So I think that we all kind of default to that same idea that somebody else from somewhere else needs to come and save us all, particularly in these small towns and rural places. And then sometimes we actually do need that help, and I think obviously that's okay. But when that happens, when somebody from outside comes and kind of saves the day, a big part of the wealth that is generated through that investment leaves our town. But when local people, when residents, business owners, nonprofits, municipalities, when they own what gets built or redeveloped, there's more control over how it's used and more control over who benefits. And that doesn't mean that every local actor is going to do what's in the best interest of our community, but it means that the financial returns are more likely to stay local and that the social returns and the social impacts are likely to be stronger. And kind of in that same space, I think we see stronger feelings of pride and a more sustained investment in the property. We see greater civic engagement because as we grow those community advocates with local ownership involved, it's no longer about convincing people, right? It's about us being bought into our future and our vision. So this is not an argument against outside investment or outside partners today because they can and do play an incredibly important role in how we grow, but they shouldn't always be the starting point, and I think too often they are. So we need to know that we can be our own solution when we need to be. So before we go further, I'd kind of like to see kind of what hats y'all are wearing today. I'm curious who's in the room. Are we local governments? Are we local residents who are just, itching to do a project? Um, just kind of curious to see who we have here. Okay, I think that gives us enough of a sense of who's in the room. Got some more folks answering. Okay. Well, that just might help us too as we kind of, since I think we can all see how these responses are rolling in, maybe that will help us as we're talking through things to kind of anticipate some of the questions or maybe direct some of the questions in a different way. Um, Haley, I don't know. I think we can probably close that poll if that works for you. Oh, Haley, do I need to stop that or do you stop that?
The poll has ended, so it shouldn't be visible to
Okay.
attendees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's just in time for our second poll question then. I do want to kind of start off by just understanding kind of at the beginning of this conversation where folks are in the development landscape. Like, are you thinking about it? Have you already done a project like this? Are you really just kind of testing the waters? Um, okay, great. Okay, this is exciting. All right, so there's a perfect mix of people in the room who are, everybody's kind of coming from a different point. Um, so that's super helpful. Okay, great. All right, that is helpful. Okay, so I think we all have a vision that comes to our minds when we hear um, the word developer. And maybe it's the same for everybody, maybe it's different. But what I do think is probably the same is that it's kind of like muddy and vague. Like they do something with money and magic and bulldozers, and then poof, a project appears. But really, development is just a process like anything else that we do in our work. And those developers are just following the steps in the process. And I can almost guarantee that if you're working on a project in your community, you are already doing pieces of this work. And then it's probably being given away to a developer so that they can close the deal and own the asset. I've seen that happen in so many communities, and it just kind of breaks my heart a little bit every time I see it. So this next section, this next piece that we're going to talk about is about kind of breaking down that process into more consumable pieces. So another question for you. I want to know what you think, just based on your understanding of what a developer does and who they are. What do you think a developer has that you don't have? All right. So money, connections, kind of an all of the above, but money for sure. And money might be true. They might have more money. But that shouldn't stop us. None of these things should be deciding factors in how we approach, engage, or tackle projects in our community. So again, thank you for answering and sharing this. That's very helpful context. So I actually thought it might be kind of fun, when Carrie introduced everybody, I think she mentioned that Charles Bennett operates in this space a little bit, and so I thought it might be kind of fun to hear from Charles on this. And so I wonder, Charles, if you could share with us what you think about what it means to be a developer. What are the pieces that you absolutely can't hand off? And what are the pieces that you can build a team to support you in your work?
Yeah, Kate, thanks so much. And my bio talked about for 20 plus years I worked as a project manager in this space on the private sector. Um, Development at its core is one thing. It's creating more value than cost. So in the minds of the developer, they have money and they look to place their money into developments where their money plus their expertise, connections, team, and all that can create more value than what it costs for them to put the money in. And that's a successful project. So when you talk about the things a developer can and can't do without, one of the main things that developers look at is control of the property for the purposes of placing debt on it and getting debt in order to do the project, because the developer doesn't want to put any more money in of his own than he has to. Developers work on the model of opium. Opium is called other people's money. So if I'm a developer, I want to put in the smallest amount of my money and get other people to match it, whether it be city, county, tax credits, grants, whatever it is. We see this a lot with historic tax credits as you syndicate those with both state and local tax credits, new market credits, all of these things. And so one of the things that we love to do is to show developers that come knocking on our door in Hopewell how that they can place their money here and create more value than cost and what that translates to. But I don't want to jump ahead. There's a lot of other things that we'll get into, Kate. So does that answer your question for now?
Yeah, I think what I like to help people understand um, is that there are pieces that in order to be the developer, you have to be prepared to take on.
Mhm.
But when it comes to actually getting a project developed, you can build a team of people. And that actually kind of segues really into this next slide, which is this idea of a developer skill set, right? And how often is it that any one person has all of these skill sets, right? You might have a level of familiarity, you might be, a master at some of these things or just one of these things, but there is no magical developer that walks in and does this thing all by themselves.
Nobody,
And
yeah, nobody does all of it for sure. And the best developers I worked for, they actually leaned really heavily on their design professionals that they brought in because they knew the design for professionals had the expertise to actually create the product. They had
Mhm.
the vision, maybe they had the money, they had the schedule and the connections, but they relied on the project managers, the architects, the engineers, and those interior design folks to actually create the environment. And so you're absolutely right. It's definitely a team sport.
Yeah. And that too, right? So again, when we bring it back to being the developer, like so if you're going to sit in that seat and say, I am going to be the developer of this project, and we'll talk a little bit more about what all that looks like in reality. But really, it's like if you can hold the vision and purpose of the project, you can, and you have site control, so you're actually allowed to make decisions about the project. You can effectively bring in all those other people and all of those other components to help you make it happen. So it's really just kind of this effort to kind of demystify what it means to be a developer, because I do think that we have always held them in such esteem and they feel like these people that we have to attract from the outside in. How are we going to make them want to choose us? And we just have to be willing to choose ourselves. And if we choose ourselves, then maybe they'll just want to come and be a part of what we're doing. But if we can kind of break it down and really understand what all the pieces are of this process, and that it's not magic that makes a developer. It's passion, it's vision, and it's courage, and it's the willingness to kind of stick to it and build a team. That's what you bring to the project. And then you can kind of pull everything else. And obviously, this is a very simplified version. There's a whole lot more that goes into it. But I think if anybody has those component parts, like those kind of foundational, fundamental pieces, we can pull in the rest of it to make it happen. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about that because I did kind of reference, um, that it can get a little bit there is a little bit more to it. So we kind of now we're all excited. It's like, okay, we can all do this. We are all like ready to get our hands dirty. I think we do want to do a little bit of a check-in to recognize that it is a big lift, right? So taking on a project is a big deal. So we know we can do it, but you have to make sure that you want to do it because it's a long game. What are the outcomes that you want or need from this project, right? Are they worth the fight? Are they worth the hard work? Do you have the thick skin to kind of stick it out when things get iffy? Because they usually do. They almost always do. And I'm sure that Charles is going to enlighten us here in a little bit when he talks about a project, about some of those iffy moments. But are you really ready to commit to this? And I think, that's where your why, like the motivation for doing this. When I shared about my project in the beginning, I had a huge why. I was like, turns out it was a different why than I thought it was going to be. But my why in the moment was how do I turn other people on to what is happening here? And that was the thing that got me through all of the sticky parts of that project. And that's I think the most important thing for each of you to connect to, especially those who aren't really sure you want to do this, because I think that's what's going to get you through those tough patches. So this is another poll. We're very poll heavy, but I do want to hear what you think those tough patches might be for you. Like, what do you think is the biggest thing that's keeping you from taking the leap? Or for those of you who are already in a project, I know we had a couple of folks say that they're already actively in a project. Like, what's the thing that's given you the most grief? Board council support, that can be a tough one too, for sure. That's another version of getting people to believe in your vision. That's hard. That can be hard. Not knowing where to start. Okay. Well, I hope that we can at least tackle some of these things, particularly where to start and funding, and maybe even if we have time later, we could talk about some of those concerns around board and council support and getting people bought in, because we can actually help you figure out how to make that case. All right, great. That's helpful. Okay. So I think the good news, I feel like this is all good news, but the good news, kind of in response to the things that might be making you nervous, is that there are a lot of ways to be involved in this work and to kind of have skin in this game when it comes to property development. And you don't have to take it on all by yourself. You know, we talked about building a team. So there are a lot of different ways that you can tackle this. And actually, one of these options that we're going to share might be kind of your solution in gaining board or council support based on maybe what their issues or questions are. So development really is kind of, when we think of that, like there's really kind of a spectrum. There's a whole range of options on how you can lead the change and still maintain ownership of your asset. So, you know, kind of on the left here, we see options that allow you to kind of bring in heavy support, which is ideal if you are just getting started or if your project is really complex. Like if you're taking on a big brownfield project, you might need some heavy hitters, somebody to really kind of drive the bus. But the further you move to the right, the more you start taking on yourself. And that DIY option is kind of perfect if you have a lot of experience, you've got a really strong team or capacity, or if the project kind of is smaller or has like a really manageable scope. And there's no best place, right, to be on the spectrum. There's no right answer. It's literally about finding the approach that fits you, your organization, your project, the goals of your community, and it's about finding the one that makes you do the thing that you want to do. And so we're going to walk kind of quickly through each of these. So this is actually the kind of lowest risk. I don't know if a fee developer is a word that is used broadly out in the universe. This is how I refer to this. In this model, your organization owns the project and sets the vision, right? Because you own it. But you hire this experienced developer to come in and kind of manage that process on your behalf. So they're kind of like your representative, and they bring all of that technical know-how, the experience, the expertise. They build the team, like they get that project across the finish line, and then all of the ownership and kind of those long-term benefits, those stay with you and your organization. So it's like a turnkey deal. They come in, they do the work, you still make the decisions, they do the work, and when they're done, you have a finished project ready to go. And I should probably also point out that when it comes to the debt and any kind of money, that's on you as well, right? So that's one of those things. I said there are two things that you have to be willing to do as the developer. You have to be willing to own the property, and you have to be willing to be responsible for the money, whether it's debt, non-debt, whatever, that's on you. So, in this other space, if your goal is to kind of learn more and kind of build your capacity over time, while you're involved in a project, then this might be a better fit for you. This is where, again, you're leading the project and you're kind of bringing in the technical expertise where you need it. Um, but the overall goal here isn't just to help complete like one project. You want to be able to like kind of learn. I always say like this is kind of like an 80-20, right? The consultant really is kind of guiding you through everything, but you're involved every step of the way. You might take ownership of some pieces, like building the team with your local folks or whatever, but it's really you're learning. You're in training. You're a developer in training in this moment, and as kind of as this project grows, you will grow, your capacity grows, and then maybe you still need a consultant for the next project, and maybe you're strong enough to go it alone. So that's kind of a learn as you go. This next one is, a good one because sometimes, again, just like with the fee developer, sometimes the project is too large or complex for one person to take on alone. And that's where you can kind of explore co-development. There are also a lot of opportunities here, just because maybe you are a nonprofit organization who brings access to non-debt services to the table, but there's this other person in your community who maybe has a lot of experience, they have ideas, whatever, and you just decide, you know what, we could buddy up on this And this might be easier and more lucrative kind of for everyone. And so you really leverage each other in that moment. And there is a lot that goes into building this relationship. But this one is another model that can really kind of ease some of the stress and anxiety of your board or your council because there's shared risk. So public-private partnerships, it could be a joint venture. And we're going to share some tools at the end of this that can help you navigate this process. But this is just another version of how you might approach a project that still is a win-win for your community. And finally, we have the DIY developer. And in this model, you are leading that entire project yourself, right? So you're acquiring, you're assembling the team, you're securing the financing, and you're providing some oversight. You're still building the team. You might have a general contractor, you might have a construction manager, all those things, but you're kind of in the driver's seat. So this one offers the most control. There will be the greatest long-term benefit from this because none of those, financial gains from the project are going to other partners or other places. But it also has the most responsibility and risk. And so, if you're new to the game, this is going to be best if you have like some of those maybe smaller, more traditional Main Street projects. And then, you can, just like with the others, I guess you can kind of grow over time, and the size of your project can grow over the time. But truly, none of these models, is better than another, right? It's literally just about finding the model that matches your goals, your capacity, your appetite for risk, and ultimately gets your project done. So, another poll question for you. Based on this, like kind of what we've talked about, is there a development model that feels right for you today? Co-developer. Yeah, that's great. The co-developer model can be really powerful, and it could be you could have all different reasons for buddying up with somebody. You could be two nonprofits. It could be a private partner. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You can make it work. It's just about having an agreement in place, and being willing to take those risks together. So that's great. Okay. So. One of the goals of the day is to kind of demonstrate that there is not just one type of community developer. For the longest time, I think I mentioned in my story that that my group was a nonprofit. People used to think that nonprofit, like we're a nonprofit, we can't do that. I mean, maybe you're not allowed to own property, but who knows? I mean, right? So it's like every nonprofit's different. So there's no one picture or version of a community developer. And so I would like to hear from Charles to kick us off here. He's going to share kind of a municipal example. What does it look like to be kind of in that municipal leadership role and take on a project? And then if we have time, I really want to be able to spend as much time with Charles because he's here with us. So if you have questions for Charles, you should definitely ask him those. And then if we have time after that, I'll share another couple of little highlight projects, one from another nonprofit and another from an individual community member. But do take advantage of the fact that Charles is here in the room, and can answer questions about his project. So Charles, I'll pass it over to you if you want to walk us through. And when you're done with the slide, you just tell me next.
Okay, great. Thanks. So real quick, for those of you who haven't heard about Hopewell, um, we're going to talk to you today about something I'm calling more than a brownfield, and it's how we took a contaminated industrial site and actually had like the trifecta of outcomes. Next slide, please. So we were founded in 1912 by DuPont. They came and bought 1,200 acres here on the banks of the Appomattox River and the James River and built a gun cotton factory to fill their orders for gun cotton. That's the propellant that's used in the large cannons during World War I. And so we went from about 800 people in this little port community to over 30,000 people in a matter of a few weeks. In 1916, we were incorporated as a city, so not too old. We're just about 110 years old this year. And today we have a large legacy of advanced chemical manufacturing here, kind of where DuPont used to be in their original factory. Next slide, please. So I want to talk to you about one of our manufacturers, and this is a story about a gentleman named Win Butterworth. His family was in the furniture business for years, and Win got an idea in the 1980s that he could make mattresses locally here and sell them in the Butterworth Furniture Store and other places, as opposed to buying the ones that were made out of town. And he said he could make a better product, so he formed Custom Comfort by Win in 1988. And then he went and bought one of the old technical buildings that used to be a school. The city of Hopewell was segregated in education, like many cities in the South. And so he bought what was formerly the African American Technical School Training Center and built his factory there to start manufacturing these mattresses. Next slide, please. That was going well for about almost 30 years until one night in March of 2023, a fire destroyed the mattress factory. I think it was electrical spark that got into like where the mattress foams were stored. The amazing thing was this was almost a month and a day after I started with the City of Hopewell as the Director of Economic Development and Tourism. And so my goal and job was to keep businesses in Hopewell and also to help attract and bring more. And by the way, Hopewell is where I was born and raised. I graduated from school here in '93, and then I went out and worked all around the region in Mid-South in commercial real estate. Then I came back 30 years later, kind of to settle back in my home community and serve here. And so I'm calling the owner on his cell phone the morning after this happened. And I said, Justin, I said, we want to keep you in Hopewell. What can we do? And so the highest priority was to find him a place because I knew to rebuild his factory was going to take a long time. And so in 6 weeks, we found this building and had him moved in, and he was operating. He's since purchased the building. We negotiated with, or we helped him to negotiate a lease to go in and start manufacturing again very quickly. And then he had an option with that lease to purchase and renovate. And so this is a picture of the building. It used to be a fertilizer and like a farm supply store for the community. And so he had to clean it, renovate it, air condition, do everything so he can make his operations there. And that's one of the gentlemen inside sewing the mattresses. Next slide, please. So what was left now was this industrial site that he had, and he owned about 2 acres on the street frontage, and then the city actually owned this parcel that used to be a playground ball field in the back. And so we identified this as a site that was a strategic location to the industrial development in the area. You can see there's a map of Hopewell. You see all of our manufacturers there, and then where this piece of property was. And so I said, Justin, what's your plan with this property? He said, I don't know. I don't know what to do with it. I said, let me talk to City Council because I think we would like to buy it and position it for redevelopment. Next slide, please. In the midst of my conversation with Justin, one of the older gentlemen in our community, a 93-year-old African American whose daughter served in the city council, called me and said, "Do you know about the little building there behind the mattress warehouse that burned down?" I said, "No, tell me about the little building." He said, "That was our schoolhouse." And I said, "That was your schoolhouse?" And so I went and researched in the newspaper, and I found out that little building there showed in the picture that was saved by the fire because it was about 10 feet behind the mattress manufacturing warehouse, but still on the same property. That was the original building that Reverend Samuel Perry started teaching African American students in 1916, the year we were incorporated as a city. He had 80 students in that building. And later, it was actually moved from its original location across the railroad tracks to this building when they built the Carter G. Woodson School beside it in the early 1940s. And they then bricked around it, and I did some research, and then I went to city council with a pitch. Next slide, please. So the pitch to city council was this. It was, we own this property behind it that's landlocked. Justin owns this property that burned down in front of it that includes this African American schoolhouse. Let's buy the property. Let's separate a parcel with the African American schoolhouse for a community for a education museum, and then let's combine the 1.9 acres of industrial land with the old playground in the back, and let's market that for industrial redevelopment and business attraction. One of the things you got to understand, because of all the industries in Hopewell, we have 0% vacancy in our industrial property. If there's a warehouse in Hopewell, it's full. And so we thought this is going to be a really easy lift. We'll essentially get this property and combine it. We'll do the legwork to do all of the legal plats, and then we'll be able to market it easily and get somebody to come build a logistics distribution warehouse here. I was pitching this to city council while I was attending a Virginia Brownfields conference, my first one in Danville. And that's when I found about the VBAF grant program. And so I came back and I applied for the VBAF grant to help with all this work, because council was like, we'll support, buying it, but you got to figure it all out. And I said, no problem. I put back on my developer hat and went to work. Next slide, please. So what we did was we were able to get the $50,000 Virginia Brownfield Assistance Fund grant. And with that, we did the property evaluation, the environmental assessment. We were actually able to abate. This is a picture inside of the little schoolhouse. We were actually able to abate the asbestos inside with it, and do our wetlands delineation and do all the work that we needed to do to kind of de-risk the project so that a future developer coming in would see like a less risk, because we were basically vetting everything out. And we also were able to, with that 50,000, to start doing some concept plans for how you would rebuild on that site. And that's where we ran into what everybody doesn't think about, which is kind of the worst case scenario. And that's, you've got this vision, you got this plan, but then something comes up. Next slide, please. And for us, the was, oh my goodness, it's a lot wetter than it used to be. So than we thought. So the wetlands delineation actually showed every area that I colored in blue. I'm a very visual guy. I'm old school, so I do colors and whatnot over top of the plans. And so what we found was that there was a lot less developable land, and we had these wetlands. And so I started doing these concepts. Okay, can we do self-storage? How many units can we get on here? What does that look like? At the end of the day, guys, it's got a pencil. So if it doesn't make sense, if the math is not mathing, then you're not developing. So you got to pay for it in some way. Grants are great, but long-term wise, the math has to math. So self-storage, how many units could get there? What would be the cost? We've got to mitigate some wetlands. Okay, and then I was like, with the shape of the property, maybe we could do, this is on the far right, this is a logistics distribution that's got some tractor trailer court trucks on the front, and it's got some 24-foot box trucks on the side and some office area circulation. I got to mitigate some wetlands. That gets expensive. So next slide. And then in the meantime, we were working on, okay, how can we take this schoolhouse and how can we utilize what was the loading dock area where they used to back trucks down in for the wet mattresses warehouse? How can we take that and make that maybe a entrance to come in, reuse the slab? Don't be afraid to reuse. It's not a dirty word. Reuse as much as you can if it meets code, and if you can beat to fit, paint to match. That's a that's an old developer term I learned a long time ago, particularly in historic adaptive reuse. It's like you've got to essentially utilize what you can. You can't tear it down and make it all brand new and pretty and perfect. You've got to use the assets that you have if they're safe and if they're able to be reused. So reusing the slab of what was the mattress warehouse, reusing that, infilling to make a parking lot, cutting out, making some islands. And so we started to develop what's the site kind of look like here for the museum. Next slide, please. And so here's kind of the numbers of what we invested from a city standpoint. So the property acquisition, 196,000. And then you can see the wetlands delineation, the remediation, the phase one, the abatement, all of this we did. So we got about 250,000 in it, and 50,000 came from that brownfields. Here's some concept renderings. We haven't done this yet with the schoolhouse. We're still working on it. But this is some renderings of what we imagine it's going to probably look like. Next slide, please. And so in the same time that we did that and we were working on the schoolhouse, we also were called by a developer that does battery storage. And what this map here shows, Dominion has an electrical power plant that's 2 parcels over. This developer had essentially already secured a right to purchase the area in yellow for part of their battery storage project, to basically buy power and sell it back to Dominion Power. And then they approached us and buying our property. Well, we were not excited about selling them the property for a battery storage project, and we're not going to get into all of that today. That's a totally separate conversation. But as a local municipality, your tax revenue with energy projects is not even established by you if it's over a certain megawatt. It's all done by the State Corporation Commission in Virginia. So it's really kind of uncertain on what the return would be. So instead, what we said is, okay, look, if we had developed this property industrial wise, then we would have a certain amount of revenue that we anticipated coming back into the city. The math's got a math. And so we said, we'll do a land lease with you. And basically, so we essentially structured a land lease. And the beautiful thing about that is the land lease creates revenue coming directly back into our Economic Development Authority. And it essentially then at the end of that, we still retain ownership of the property for its next life. So you don't want to give up control if you can have your cake and eat it too. The developer gets the energy project. He gets to put his batteries there. When he's done, whenever that is, then we keep the property and it can become its next life. And so it was a lot of legal work. It took over a year to negotiate this, but we've created essentially on that economic side about $3 million in value that's going to come back to the Economic Development Authority through this transaction over that period of time. We've got the schoolhouse preserved, and it's going to, we'll keep putting money into that to get it open as a museum. And then we're able to take and clean up what was a brownfield site. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, what we like to say is that it's always more than a brownfield. So what is it that you've got? What are you looking at, and how can you make it better? So I know I ran through that fast, but I want to make sure we have plenty of time.
Yeah, this was very exciting. I'm glad you put some guardrails on the things. You said a few things, and then you're like, we won't get into that because I
Yeah.
immediately had questions about those. So I'll have to
Yeah.
follow up with you
Yeah.
this later. But I do want to pause just real quickly and see if anybody has any questions. There were other things that you kind of mentioned around the brownfield funding. I know we've got obviously brownfield professionals in the room that might be able to kind of weigh in with some thoughts or comments or questions. So I guess I would just encourage if anybody has questions for Charles about this project, feel free to take yourself off mute and holler.
I have a question
Sure.
from the Community Design Assistance Center at Virginia Tech. Was there any mold in the schoolhouse project or any of the other projects that you worked on?
So mold in Central Virginia, every building has mold in it, every single one. Yes. And so what you really got to look at when it comes to mold is what's the concentration of mold spores inside the building versus outside the building on that given day. And you want to make sure, see, mold is all about the environment. So if you create an environment for the mold to grow, if it's wet, if it's humid, if it's at the right temperature, you will have mold growth. And then you have the sugar for it to eat. So the sugar being the wood or the paint or the drywall. Mold loves drywall. So so yes, and that's part of the buildings. And when you're doing, it's normally not looked at in the regular environmental assessments because there's, as you may know, there's no like like standard on mold as a hazardous material in like a phase 1, but it's definitely something that we asked to be looked at. And thank you for bringing that up, because I encourage that to be checked for. And you can identify issues with roofs and basement foundations and all those windows, all those things when you start looking at where is the mold at and why is it there.
And where have you gotten funding from to remediate the mold?
I've not been able to secure any kind of funding for remediation, because normally the mold is, as I said, it's because of a building condition. So it's used, that falls in the traditional section of you got to fix the building condition first, and that's part of your construction project normally.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And there may be funds out there for mold remediation. I just personally haven't found those. Usually I have to take care of it on the construction project side.
Okay.
That's great. Are there any other questions about the project?
I wanted to, while we were going through this, Kate, I remembered another project where, just real quickly, we had a nonprofit, the Lamb Arts Center, in our downtown, which is a nonprofit arts group, and they chose the DIY, the do it yourself model. Even though it was their first project, that one of their board members had some expertise, so he kind of led that. But we utilized in that the IRF grant, and because they were a nonprofit, they didn't have to receive it as a loan; they received it as a grant, and they combined a Virginia Brownfields Assistance Fund grant for the remediation, asbestos, taking all that stuff out, and then the drawings and plans, and then they did the IRF grant and put it all together. And I'll tell you this, in your communities, look for, first and foremost, those folks who are nonprofits who do good community work already. They're your best targets for this kind of redevelopment, because they're probably in a space paying rent already. So they're probably taking their operational cost from the grants they receive every year, and they probably got an expense line, and that expense line says, $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month. If you can take that and you can show them how they can basically pay themselves to be in a building that they own, instead of making a landlord, rent and making the landlord make a profit, that actually reduces their operating expenses. They can do more programming and they can do more good benefit. And the board likes that. And are there risks? Absolutely, there are risks, but it's actually better funding opportunities for them as nonprofits than if it was a regular business developer. So I see a huge value in that, and I would encourage anybody, when they're starting looking around their community, and don't wait for people to come from the outside. Don't I'm all with you there on that, Kate. If it works for the people on the outside, it works for people on the inside. That's the thing. It's the same math.
Yeah.
The difference is like, how do we control our own destinies? And local governments, like, it's not our part to own and operate everything. Find out what your part is in the picture. Local governments, we do the things that local governments do great. Economic development authorities, we do what they do great. And then developers do what they do great. But don't forget those owner occupants, because owner occupants are just a match made in heaven for redevelopment opportunities, particularly main streets.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for saying all of that, because it's about collaborating, right? And kind of getting out of the silo and sharing your vision, not being afraid to share your vision and not being afraid to ask for help, and again, just to kind of buddy up. And if you are a private individual, again, kind of like exploring that co-development model. What does it look like if we form some sort of a joint venture with you as a nonprofit? How can we leverage each other to make this project pencil? And to your point about, making math and happen, we're going to hear from Alex here shortly, and she'll be able to kind of walk us through that. And I guess also, you mentioned too, just like different funding sources. And I mean, it can take a lot of different buckets to make one of these even the small projects. I mean, the one that I kind of opened with, that tiny little Main Street building, I think at the end of it, we had like 13 different sources. I mean, it was not a fun math project, but it's what it took to make it work. So anyway, there are so many creative solutions to make your vision a reality, and there are so many different technical support resources. I mean, just like Tab here in the room hosting this webinar. So many different partners who can come to the table and help you make it a reality. So I'm going to share a couple of other quick examples of folks who have made projects happen. Just to kind of quickly highlight, this was a nonprofit organization here in Southern West Virginia. We actually, Atlas, my team, actually worked with this organization, the Riff Raff Arts Collective, and we developed the kind of consultant perspective. These folks are already making great change in their downtown in the southern part of the state, but they needed help navigating this process. They did not want to be developers, but they wanted to see a really powerful project happen in their town. And the only way for them to do it was to step in and do the work to make it happen. So this was a historic redevelopment project that is just one part of a much larger vision. They are embarking on bringing in a center of industrial history in their community. And there's a really big, beautiful story behind that I won't go into all those details. But ultimately, they were in this position to say, we need this area of land. The owner was about to sell it to a tire center. So all of a sudden in their downtown, they were at risk of having this tire sales facility in their downtown, and they thought this can't happen. And so they called us and said, "Can you help us?" And so we kind of walked alongside them and helped them secure funding so that they could have site control of this building and the surrounding acreage. And then together we have embarked on the redevelopment of this historic grocery store. And so they again had a really strong vision. They did not have site control, so that was the first hurdle. They didn't have any development experience, except they're super savvy and they have a lot of good friends in the community that have that kind of experience. They know architects, they know people that are in the construction and the skilled trades. And so we built a team. And she was able, the director of that nonprofit was able to convince her board by saying, "Look, we're going to lead, but we're not going it alone." And so they brought in the team to kind of mitigate that risk. And we've kind of walked through those fires together. And now, actually, since we started this project, and now we're literally right up against construction, should be starting any moment. We did secure federal funding for this project, and as Alex will address in a bit, the way that landscape has shifted has made drawing those funds down a little bit harder today than it would have been before. So we're just waiting on that. But since embarking on this journey, they purchased another building and turned it into a coffee shop. So they grew their capacity. They grew their credibility in the community as a team who is capable of doing this work and doing it well. And so, now they're generating more revenue for their nonprofit to support their good work. And it has just been a really powerful, powerful transformation, not only for downtown Princeton, West Virginia, but for that organization. Another kind of fun example is this is just a kind of a spotlight of a gal who did something pretty remarkable in my opinion. I kind of fangirled over her for a number of years. We kind of entered this scene together. I don't know, Charles, if you're familiar with this gal. Her name is Bernice Rattle, and she is the founder of a company called Buffalo. She's in Buffalo, New York, and she was in her community with kind of watching her neighborhood decline. And the neighborhood was filled with all of these beautiful historic homes that were in, severe disrepair, et cetera. And she just thought, I mean, to your point, right, Charles, like if a developer from outside can do it, I can do it too. And that was her mindset. She's like, in her quote, I care too much to wait for someone else. And so she did it. She was like, I'm just going to figure this out. She bought these two distressed properties. She turned them around. She revitalized, those homes. And then she started taking on the next. So she has become kind of a figure in this idea of what it is to be an incremental developer, right? Taking small bite-sized projects and creating change, building local wealth, and, kind of, changing your community from the inside out. One of the remarkable things to me about Bernice is that, and I don't know what it was, if it was just kind of her energy and kind of who she is as a person, or maybe it was her storytelling, because I know that she's not the only person across the country to do this kind of meaningful work, but she did spark something, and she's really, I think, become, as I said, kind of a figurehead for this. But she's taken that experience and now she's teaching people. So again, it's another version of creating a movement, right? Teaching people to take ownership in the places that they love, create change, and create, opportunities for other people, to do the same things in our community. So if you ever have a few minutes and you're curious to learn about the work that she does, again, it's Buffalo. She has since grown. She does a bunch of other things in the historic preservation space. But she is just such a great example because she started with something so small and attainable and achievable and has really just transformed her neighborhood in Buffalo. So, how did she do it? How do any of us do it? Right. And one of the biggest things is money. And we talked about that early on. Like, what are the challenges? What are the things that keep us from getting involved in this work? What does it mean to access capital? It can all be super scary. And I do think that even when we believe in our idea, we're passionate about the idea, and we're passionate in our team, this is probably the one thing that keeps us from doing it. Even if you know where to get it, do you have the risk tolerance to take it on? And so this is where we're going to hear from Alex Holland, our fearless leader at Atlas. Let me ask this question. We'll tee her up. While I'm making this transition to Alex, what is your biggest concern about accessing capital specifically? And Alex, I'll let you watch for those responses and plug in whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Right. It looks like we have a mix of concerns here, everything from finding grants or non-debt funding to securing that bridge loan and completing a diversified capital stack. So good. So let's jump in here to our first slide. So if you've been paying attention the past year and a half, we've had a very unexciting time in the funding space. There have been no changes. It's been really status quo. If you have been paying attention, you know that I was being very sarcastic in saying that we've had a lot that has changed over the past year and a half here. Before we talk about all the things that are happening, we need to start with a really basic question, and that is how are development or redevelopment projects actually financed? And I imagine that most of you probably have the same desire, which is we hope that we could secure all the grant funding we need to make this happen. But I think you probably also understand that grants are only one piece of the puzzle. And typically, developers, community champions have to combine public funding, private financing, tax incentives, and community investment to build sort of your multi-layered capital stack to actually make things happen. And so we have a few different categories here on the screen that I just want to talk about because they all address different things. We have public funding, which includes, various federal and state grants, maybe some local incentives, your earmarks, your capital outlay, or whatever it is that your state does. That typically provides funding to address projects with public benefits. You've got private capital, which really helps keep our projects moving and more often than not are a source of your debt financing, which I know is the least sexy version of funding that you might want. We also have tax incentives, and that typically attracts your private investment, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. And then your community capital really helps you fill some of your funding gaps that you might have, but it also demonstrates local commitment and buy-in with your project. But I think ultimately the goal here isn't to find one funding source for your project, and I would open that up to most projects, right? But here, especially in development projects, the goal is to identify the right combination of funding sources. But before we sort of step into the next slide, Kate, I'm going to tag you back in because of all of your work with the different tax incentives. We'll talk a little bit about new markets and opportunity zones here in a bit. But if you could just talk a little bit about your use of tax credits and some of the projects you've worked on, that'd be great.
Yeah, from my Main Street life and with the work that I did in historic preservation and redevelopment projects in that space, I was super excited and bought in on the idea that, tax credits will make your project pencil. And on paper, it is 100% true. And sometimes in reality, it is 100% true. But what I have found, what I have learned over the years is that you just need to be cautious with historic tax credits. And if you're not familiar with like the tax credit piece, it's an opportunity for you to, even if you're a nonprofit, you can use tax credits, but it's an opportunity for you as a developer to attract capital cash dollars in exchange for these tax credits that somebody, either you or somebody else who's going to be involved in your project, can use to relieve their tax liability. So that's very high level, but anyway, in the Main Street universe and in small town revitalization, we talk a lot about using tax credits. And I just want to caution that these two have there's an appetite in the world for them. And because there's a lot of work that goes into doing a tax credit project, they usually have to have a certain value before somebody will be interested in taking them on. And it doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means there's a very specific strategy. If you decide you want to go after tax credits, there's some certain ways that you might approach it to be more successful. So I know that's again kind of very high level because I don't want to go too deep down, but I also just feel like I feel like people get burned a little bit when they start planning their capital stack and they're just like tax credits are going to save the day. And maybe. So anyway, we can answer any questions you have about that later, but just kind of flag that in your brain. Same thing when we talk about new market tax credits, opportunity zones. Those are things that could potentially, based on the size of your project, the location of your project in your community, in terms of census tract and things like that, you could be really well positioned to attract those, and they could have a significant impact on your project. Just be mindful that just because you are in a new market tax credit zone, you don't automatically assume that these are going to shape or influence your project or fund your project. The brownfield tax incentives, these are once upon a time at the federal level, there were tax incentives available that truly were kind of more in that deduction space. The tax credits, which are like kind of a one for one, dollar into the project kind of, those may be available at the state level. And so certain states offer a true brownfield tax credit, but not all of them. So the other thing I'll say is that if you are considering a project that involves tax credits, definitely build a team for that. There are a lot of really great partners in the universe who can help you. And definitely, like, there are some syndicators that can help you kind of navigate that. You'll need to have attorneys involved. So, again, don't be afraid of them, explore them, just don't get oversold. And if you want to bring them in, definitely bring in somebody with the know-how to navigate that space. Do you want me to say anything else about that, or we'll just leave it there?
No, that's perfect, Kate. The last thing I'll say under community capital is don't forget about the people in your community or people who care about your community or your particular project, because there are plenty of times when they do have disposable income that they would like to invest back into their hometown or their community that they or a project that they care about. I believe Kate and I were chatting about this recently, but I believe it was in Princeton, Kate, that they were able to raise about $12 million just through a capital campaign that they did locally. So while that might not be able to happen everywhere at that scale, I think it's really important to consider those dollars too. So we can head to the next slide, and I just want to show you all on the next slide here an example of how to how you can build a capital stack for your project. So this is just sort of a sampling of how these funding sources can come together over the life of the project. And this might be really overwhelming to see all of these different sources that might be able to support various phases of your project. But a lot of that really depends on the complexity and size of your project. You might not need all of these different sources, but I think it really paints a fuller picture for what it might take to bring a project from, ideation to fruition. One thing I want you to see is that everything prior to construction is typically going to be the most difficult funding to secure, because you really need to leverage what I would call your belief capital, right? So, in other words, you really need to be able to build buy in for your project. And the best way that you can do that is by doing your due diligence. The level of effort that you put into pre-development is likely going to determine the project's success or failure. And I think Charles made a really good point. And here's my caveat to this is that not all projects pencil out despite your persistence. So we need to make sure that everything looks good, the math is mathing. But these are typically your hardest grants to secure. But there are a few resources here that I'd like to point out just in the stack on the screen. Don't forget your teams, your people at TAP. They can provide some really great technical assistance, either directly or through some of their TA providers related to some of the pre-development support for your project. And that's a great resource that's at no cost to you. So definitely take a look at that. If your site is a brownfield, EPA does provide assessment and cleanup grants. And I think depending on where you're at in the process, it'd be really worthwhile to see if your community or region has received an assessment grant in recent years that you might be able to benefit from. EPA has really been leaning in on sort of these broader, more like coalition grants where they're doing assessments for different properties throughout the community. So definitely take a look at that. Those lists are public and out there. There are also brownfield revolving loan funds. Often those are initially capitalized by EPA. And these RLFs are taken in by public entities that can administer loans and subgrants to carry out cleanup activities if that is necessary at specific brownfield sites. But then, unrelated to brownfields, there are also some community entities such as planning and development districts, maybe their councils of government, local development districts, and others that can maintain a revolving loan fund, and they can make these low interest loans to support small businesses, commercial real estate projects, infrastructure, affordable housing. So there are also some other options not related to brownfields that you might consider for your project. Once you start to get into construction and operations, I think by that point you've proven that you're ready to move forward, and those funds seem to come a little bit easier because funders are able to see a lot of the due diligence that you've done to make sure your project pencils out and to allow you to move forward. So Kate, let's go to the next slide here. And we'll talk about now just how things have been evolving over the past couple of years. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are aware of the Department of Government Efficiency, otherwise known as DOGE. That, of course, was initially spearheaded by Elon Musk at the beginning of this administration, and it really created a lot of disruption throughout the federal government. It cut many programs and grants, including some of those that supported, economic and community development, that supported projects like you all might be carrying out in your communities or are interested in carrying out. Doge officially closed its doors this month. I actually think that happened on July 4th. But its impacts remain. We've seen some, congressionally appropriated grant programs that are just being held up or are not being released at all, even though funding exists. Um, if and when they are finally released, we are also seeing federal agencies that are providing very little time for applicants to submit a proposal. I've seen grant cycles be 5 days over a holiday weekend. I've seen 2 weeks. Maybe you're getting 30 days, but as you know, federal programs require really robust proposals, and we really need to have our ducks in order before we go after those. So it's really important to try to plan in advance to understand the programs that might be out there, especially the ones that are typically annually appropriated, and understand what requirements were, in the past year, for example, so that you might be able to prepare a proposal in the future if and when it's released under a very tight timeline. Moving into IIJA and Bill, our major infrastructure package that was passed under the Biden administration, those dollars and those programs officially sunset this September. That was obviously a massive appropriations package that ended up being passed with our surface transportation reauthorization 5 years ago. And that is currently being, a new bill is being considered right now. The majority of the programs that were in IIJA and bill have been gutted in the bill that's currently under consideration for surface transportation. There are some exceptions like Safe Streets for All, not necessarily relevant to development projects, but they're really reorganizing what that looks like. If you are interested in advocating for the extension of those programs, I would argue that you'd want to do that right now with your congressional delegations. If this is passed without the extension of these programs, we're really going to have to get adjusted to much lower levels of funding, and that's sort of already starting. But I think it's going to be really apparent in 2027 or even later this year, and that includes funding, through the EPA Brownfields program. I believe the Brownfields program had received like 5 times as much funding under IIJA than under normal circumstances. Or even if you benefit from, smaller federal agencies like the Appalachian Regional Commissions or ARC, they had received $1 billion where they typically are only receiving, $200 million a year. So those are really huge impacts to consider. Moving on to some related news around the Office of Management and Budget, otherwise known as OMB. They have proposed to make really substantial changes to the federal grant system as we know it. When the proposed changes were released to the public for comment, OMB ended up receiving nearly 500,000 responses. And here's what's concerning with what they've proposed. They want to have grant applications be evaluated really through a very political lens and less on merit. Existing grant awards that you already have can be terminated at any time based on the administration's priorities. That might mean you received your grant award under the current administration, but maybe they changed their mind on how they want to do things 30 days later. They could just cancel at any time. It also provides greater compliance burden, which would require grantees to provide additional justification beyond the norm for every individual grant reimbursement request. So If you've already had a federal grant, you understand that you typically have to provide all of your justification for any reimbursements that you're requesting. This would provide another layer of homework that you'd have to do. And then the last really concerning thing, although there's some other items too, is that it would eliminate the coverage of certain operational expenses for organizations receiving federal funds, things like advertising or membership dues. Okay, I'm going to stop talking about bad news. I'm going to talk about better news. Hopefully, some of you have started to engage in federal earmarks, which we're not generally supposed to call those that anymore. I still do. Keeps it shorter. The new name is community project funding or congressionally directed spending. CPF or community project funding are earmarks that come out of the House. Congressionally directed spending or CDS are earmarks that come out of the Senate. These are direct requests that you can make to your congressional members to request funding for your projects. These typically go to public entities or nonprofits and not necessarily to individuals or for profits. So just keep that in mind. But there are a number of projects that can be supported by these types of dollars. You do need to make sure that your congressional delegation or your members actually support or sponsor earmarks. That is not just a given. But I would say right now, if you wanted to prepare for that, it's good to have an idea of what your project might be this fall and winter, because you're going to want to start to socialize those ideas with your congressional delegation, because applications will open up in the spring of next year is typically kind of how that works. This is long game. This can take, a year or more for you to actually get awarded funding. And there's a huge process that you have to go through to do that. But I will say the applications to actually submit are simple on the front end if you're interested in that. And we could talk about that more later. I'm happy to answer any questions. The other thing I want to mention are programmatic requests. And that is because around the same time that you can apply for CPF or CDS, you can and should submit requests to ask for grant program funding increases if it's something that you use a lot. As an example, asking for the EPA brownfields grant programs to have increased funding because it's really impactful to your community. Any others, are relevant in that same vein. You might request to make changes to existing programs. Maybe you're wanting to see a greater priority on rural communities or rural organizations, as an example. You can also request the creation of new programs. So it's just another tool in your toolbox to advocate for economic and community development projects. Okay. We'll jump into tax incentives here. And I know Kate's already touched on a little bit of this, but there are a couple things I just want to make sure you're aware of. New markets tax credits used to have to be extended over and over and over again for limited periods of time, which used to create a lot of uncertainty for investors, community development entities that typically take in those tax credits and administer them, as well as developers. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBA is what I'll call it because that's a really long name. OBA made these a permanent federal incentive. So that's good news around predictability for these. They are still really competitive. They are still really transaction intensive. They are typically better suited for your larger, more catalytic projects. And they are still dependent on receiving an allocation from a community development entity. So as Kate mentioned, these are not just guaranteed dollars to support your projects. Earlier this year, Treasury's CDFI fund issued a $10 billion double allocation round, really because they held off last year, and that went all across to 142 CDEs to distribute. Opportunity zones, which made a bigger splash years ago, were also made permanent in OBA as a federal tax incentive, but they also completely redesigned the program. Beginning in next year, opportunity zones will be redesignated every 10 years. Our current opportunity zones, as we know them, will expire this December. And right now, governors are currently selecting the next generation of opportunity zones or census tracts. So you should be engaging now if you believe that there are particular census tracts that should be nominated and included in the next round of opportunity zones, because they'll be that way for the next 10 years. There were a number of changes to opportunity zones, like decreasing the income threshold to be considered. So it used to be 80% median household income average, and now it's 70%. So it's really kind of limiting where these opportunity zones can be designated. You can't have contiguous tract designations, and they've also provided some anti-gentrification provisions that really remove higher income areas. I'm sure plenty of folks saw like some of the OZs that were named in like Brooklyn, for example. There were also a lot of changes made to rural incentives, which just make it a little bit more enticing for investors to invest in qualified rural opportunity funds. There used to be investors used to have to invest in 100% of the building's original purchase value, excluding land, in improvements. Now it's only half of that. So that's a big deal. If it's $1 million building, for example, the investor used to have to make a $1 million investment. Now it's 500,000 in order to qualify. So that's a big deal. Last thing on tax incentives for historic tax credits. Right now, there is legislation, HTC Go, that has 48 co-sponsors. It was introduced in the spring of last year. The current historic tax credits remain unchanged, but this legislation would actually increase federal historic tax credits from 20% to 30% for small and rural projects, which is really big. So it really helps reduce barriers for projects under $5 million, and also reduces that rehab threshold from 100% to 50% of the building's adjusted basis. So it allows a lot more buildings to qualify for historic tax credits. So hopefully that improves access to nonprofits and community-based developers if it is passed. Right now, it's kind of stalled. It's been reported to committee for consideration. Okay, that was a lot of information. We're going to go a lot faster on the next slide here. Couple other things to consider around funding. With all of the changes that we've had, over the past couple of years, philanthropy has really been oversubscribed, as you might imagine. If you are in a more rural region or a smaller town, the other thing to consider is, like, at this point, only 7% of philanthropic dollars actually go to your areas. And we're starting to see philanthropy try to improve those numbers. And they're doing that through what's really been widely accepted as trust-based philanthropy, where they're trying to work more so through the lens of the grantees to collaboratively develop proposals that make sense both for the grantee or potential grantee as well as philanthropy. It's really important to build relationships with philanthropy, like your program officers or grant officers. And this might take time because ultimately they still need to be able to support a mission. They have their focus that they need to achieve, but these dollars are typically a lot more flexible than your federal stuff or even your state stuff. Speaking about state funding, a lot of this is really dependent on where you're at, right? Like, you have your own statewide political climate around what funding is available, but I'll just say, generally engaging with your, state and local delegations that represent you is going to be really, really important to secure state funding, as well as making sure you develop relationships with state agencies that might be able to help you in the future. Like, maybe they're able to let you know about funding programs that might be coming up, but they also may be able to provide some TA around funding proposals or application processes that you're interested in. And last slide here, Kate. Ultimately, there are so many moving pieces and things that you need to do in order to position your project for investment. And a lot of this was already addressed by Kate and Charles, but you really have to have that clear vision. You have to make sure you've got that site under control. You've done your due diligence, things pencil out, you have contingencies. You've got a team in place, whichever way that you compose your development team. You've got your partners, and they have experience. You've got your capital strategy in place and you understand how you're going to build out that capital stack, including the potential for matching funds, including leveraging any local investment that you might be able to. The last couple of pieces here are around advocacy and sustainability. Once we do all of our due diligence, we have to be able to tell our story in order to secure investment, right? Funders want to believe in something. They want to make sure that they're investing in something that they can get a return on, and be able to point at as a success story. And the way that you story tell really should be from the eyes or the interest of the particular funder. Last thing, don't forget about sustainability once you're done with your actual development project. There's a lot that needs to happen to keep that thing going into, or keeping it into productive reuse. And Kate, I believe I'll hand this back over to you.
Yeah, thank you. That was so I would imagine that there are some questions kind of brewing in this group, and there's not a lot of time left to address questions because we did have a whole bunch of stuff that we wanted to kind of cram into this short time that we had together. But I do want to say that, again, kind of this overarching message was really just to be that we can all do this, right? So that this idea that community developers aren't born, right? People, they're not unicorns, they're not mystical or magical. This is a skill set that we build. These are teams that we create. So I won't run through all of these, but these are kind of the things that if you leave with nothing else today, I hope that it's this idea that that there is a place for you if you want it. If you want to be in the development landscape, there is a place for you. There are different ways and different points of entry, so that you can create the change in your town and your community that you want to create. And there are a lot of resources available and a lot of people kind of in the wings standing by to help you do that. We are going to round this out today, sharing some resources with you. We have kind of a developer readiness checklist if you need to kind of do some self-awareness work and figure out, am I ready to lead this project? This will kind of walk you through that thought process. We'll kind of share with you that a little summary of those different developer roles you might want to refer to explore a good fit for you and your organization, or for you as an individual. And then we have a joint venture worksheet that's really just kind of a thought exercise. If you do decide that you want to buddy up with somebody, it's something that you and this other entity can kind of work through together to make sure that you've been thoughtful about how you're going to do this work together and kind of create some protections for yourself.